Marc Ryan. And Marc Ryan of the Fan Upstate, he joins us here on this Friday. Mark, what's going on, my man? Glad we're able to make it work. Loving the Panthers pullover, by the way. It's a good look on you.
Look at this, man. There you go. Got to represent with the local teams. Now, I can't get away with this with the Gamecocks, and I can't get away with this with Clemson because it shows favoritism. But I feel like the Panthers are enough of a neutrality, right? I will tell you this, though. When you rock this, it screams to people much more Gamecocks than Clemson. Clemson fans are bent because the Panthers have never drafted a Clemson player, okay? So there's a lot of Clemson fans that feel like, for whatever reason, the Carolina Panthers are run by Gamecocks. So I think by wearing this, it's kind of 70-30 more Gamecocks than Clemson. But here we are anyway, my brother. Great to catch up with you. Appreciate your flexibility with us this week. What is good? What is good, Daily Crow listeners? How we doing, man?
We're doing well, man. We're pretty much in the heat of baseball season, going into the second weekend, and obviously what a week of basketball it was, Mark. And I know that the Gators, I think they dropped a tough one, right, to Kentucky. I thought you guys had that one for a while. That was a pretty good game.
Yeah, man. Look, can we focus on more positive topics here today, Chris? I mean, really, no Colin Castleton for the Gators anymore the rest of the year, right? I did happen to notice outside of your game, and I know somebody, Chris, that was involved in this, the South Carolina-Alabama basketball game. Some Gamecock students went in prison gear to the Alabama and South Carolina basketball game, which to me, look, I understand the seriousness of what took place. Fans are always going to try to find the humor in a situation. Showing up to Gamecocks against Alabama in a prison jumpsuit, Chris, is that onsides or offsides?
All is fair in love and war, I think, Mark. So, I mean, whatever you want to do, the heckling. I'm a big proponent of heckling. I like heckling. Would I do it? Probably not. But,
you like heckling, Chris? I never would have known. I never would have known.
Right,
I'm learning something new about you every single day. I never would have known.
Oh, yeah.
What was it, the Clem Sucks that gave it away or what?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. So, look, the team is starting to play much better basketball with Lamont Paris. Mm-hmm. This is what you see, right? Like, slowly but surely, it may not be reflected lately in the wins and losses, but to be right there against Alabama, right there at the end of the game, again, what does this mean for this year? Not a lot. What does it mean moving forward? Quite a bit, right? It means quite a bit moving forward. And I don't know if next year's an NCAA tournament team. I have no idea. But I do think, as you watch this team, I think a realistic goal next year for the you call them the Court Cocks? Is that what you call them?
Courtcocks, yeah, the Court Cocks.
Is that what you call them? Okay. I just want to make sure I have the right version of it here, Chris, for you. This could be an NIT team next year. And look, that might not move the proverbial needle, but you got to crawl before you can walk. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're starting to see some flickers of competitiveness, not to mention a team that is totally not quitting, right? How many coaches could get a team not to quit with a season like the one they're having right now? And again, those of us who said Ray Tanner did a nice job with this hire, right? We're popping our collar a little bit right now based on the effort that you're seeing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. It's interesting. I came out of that game Wednesday night, and of course, we'll start there. Brandon Miller, no matter what you think about him or what's going on off the court, he was fantastic. And I thought the showdown between Miller and Jackson was truly a lot of fun to watch. But I came away from that game, Mark. South Carolina was a 17.5-point underdog. I picked the blowout loss. I didn't have a lot of faith, to be honest. But to see that type of effort, was it heartbreaking? I mean, for sure, right? Losing in that manner, it's always going to be tough, especially when you felt like you had victory in your grasp. But I came away from that encouraged. I mean, like you mentioned, Mark, I think it's a positive sign, things moving in the right direction. And, I think NIT would be a great step in the right direction next year and show that progression. And I think, too, what you love to see is the development of certain guys, right? Like Jacoby Wright and Josh Gray and Michi Johnson more so coming into his own. And then I just still applaud Lamont Paris, Mark, for the decision he made a couple of weeks ago to bench Gigi Jackson. And it feels like Gigi has responded, right? You got to make those tough decisions as a head coach. And he did that not because he dislikes Gigi or some sort of punishment, but, he wanted to challenge him. And I think he's made the most of it, and Gigi's into the challenge. And again, so I think, to your point, I think you have to give Lamont Paris a lot of credit for this team fighting throughout the stretch. They've got a really tough one. I'm interested to see, Mark, how they respond tomorrow, because it's not like you're playing Ole Miss or Georgia. You got Tennessee at their place, the 11th ranked Volunteers. So that'll be a really, really tough game. The matchup isn't all that great, but, Mississippi State after that, and then Georgia at your home floor to close out the regular season. But, all in all, I'm pretty impressed with the way they're closing out the year and what we all knew was going to be a tough season. But there are encouraging signs, especially from a game like Wednesday night. It made me believe even stronger, Mark, that I feel like the foundation is being laid for a solid basketball program under Lamont Paris.
Look, what is the progression, right? Like, if you are doing the chart, Chris, and you are looking at your goal of progression for this team, right? Because we have polled both Clemson and South Carolina fans, and unbelievably, the expectations for both basketball programs are exactly the same, Chris. Both Clemson and South Carolina have the same expectation. What is that expectation, you ask? I'm so glad you did. I'm here to tell you. It is make the tournament more years than you miss it. That's the expectation, right? Frank Martin is 1 for 10. Brad Brownell is one more loss away from being 3 out of 13. That's not getting her done, brother. That's not getting her done. So if you look at Lamont Paris, what about this? Year 1, no tournament. Year 2, NIT. Year 3, tournament. Year 4, tournaments. 2 tournament berths in a row. Then after 4 years, you're 2 out of 4 in terms of making the tournament. And if you can do that, right, you're looking at Lamont Paris and you're saying, look at what this guy has done, because he started with the gaslight on E, right? Like he's driving on fumes for quite a while here. And, to your point about Gigi Jackson, I don't look at that in the same negative light that some might. This is a kid who was Mr. Everything, who, has not, on the court anyway, had to deal with a ton of adversity in his competitive life. And he looks at it like he's getting embarrassed out there on the courts. And again, I agree with what Lamont Paris did. I myself, knowing myself, Chris, I think I have a good feeling for you. You and I would be pissed if we were going through some of what Gigi Jackson's going through as well. We would need a reality check, right, as well. And so I would always, and you guys let me know if you agree or disagree with this, I would always rather have a guy who is like pissed and chucking Gatorade coolers and livid and furious and popping off than the guy who's like laughing on the bench when you're losing by 20. Like, give me the guy who's pissed off, man. Give me the guy who says the BS stops right here. And, I'm really encouraged by the way that Lamont and Gigi are growing together. Whether or not Gigi comes back to school or not, what he did by committing to South Carolina showed that the Gamecock basketball program is electable, just like we were talking about with Nichols Harbor a couple weeks ago. To have those guys choose the Gamecocks opens the door for other blue chips to choose the Gamecocks in the future. And Gigi Jackson probably is a one and done, but the next guy might not be. And you might be in line for a 3 or 4 star player that wouldn't have otherwise considered the Gamecocks that is not going to leave right away. And those are the kind of players that you build around. So I'm actually really impressed, man, and I do not believe you can measure success this year for Lamont Paris in the win-loss column.
Now, Mark, you bring up something very interesting, and I'll say this. What you and other Gator fans think about your program and the expectations for your program, no matter the sport, is more important than what outsiders think. So the same thing with South Carolina. What Gamecock fans and what we think about our program and the expectations is more important than what outsiders think. I bring that up because I want to ask you, I feel like the question that hasn't been asked is this. You talk about your audience and the polling of your audience, and I would agree from the masses that I hear from as well, making the tournament more often than you don't is the expectation. But I'll ask you as an outsider, do you think that's a fair expectation for South Carolina basketball? Because it's not a program that has ever done. I mean, we talk about football and the lack of tradition and history. I mean, basketball might be even worse. So your overall thoughts, I mean, when you look at the South and we'll say, and the Clem Sucks basketball program, like, do you think that's fair expectations for two programs that really have never had that kind of success?
I absolutely, Chris, no argument stains my hands more than this argument of we can't expect to have success because we've never had success. Okay? You want to burn my brownies and crack my coconuts, man? You keep bringing that crap up, man. I got smoke coming out of my ears. That is such a loser's mentality. Okay? Woe is me. Stop acting like Eeyore around here. All of you. Okay? What was Gonzaga before Mark Few got there? What were they, Chris? They were, what are they, a West Coast Conference team? And now they've gone from a mid-major, a tiny conference team, and they have now provided the blueprint not only for the Clemsons and South Carolinas of the world, but for the Furmans of the world as well. Look at what Gonzaga has built out of nothing. Remember Wichita State, the Shockers, a few years ago? Like, give me a break, man. You get the right guy in charge, you build something. Your past does not dictate your future. History is just that. You want to live life through the rearview mirror, man? Go right ahead, but I'm looking in the windshield, brother. And until you can identify for me what the obstacles are for success, I'm looking at that as an excuse. As an excuse. You know, the reason why Frank Martin and Brad Brownell have been there as long as they are is because the athletic administrations thought what they've done is good enough. What they've done is good enough. And it's pathetic, Chris. There is absolutely nothing standing in the way of South Carolina and basketball success. Absolutely, positively nothing. Nor should that be used as an excuse in any way, shape, or form. You build your brand, you build your identity, you get the right coach in there, you recruit, you utilize the SEC. Man, there is absolute. What was Florida basketball before Billy Donovan got there? What was Florida basketball? And you know what he did? He got Mike Miller. And when Billy Donovan left, he said, how do you attribute your success at Florida? He said, I go back to Mike Miller. Because when Mike Miller chose the Gators, that showed other five stars, right, that we were a good place to go. And then Florida got Donnell Harvey and Brett Nelson and Teddy Dupay. And then they had all those. What basketball history did the Gators have, right? That is the worst possible. And I'm not saying you're making that excuse, Chris, but this whole like, we need to keep Will Muschamp because he had the best record through 3 years we've ever had. Oh, God. You can see the tail wagging the dog with the program, can't you? He won 23 games in 3 years. And that 7.6 wins a year is better than we've ever had. What a loser's mentality that is, man. When you open the blinds and you see the light outside, the future is so bright, you need shades. Cut the crap, okay? You can achieve anything. If Gonzaga can do it up in the middle of bleeping nowhere, you can too in the Southeastern Conference.
Mark, let's move from the hardwood to college football. And this is something we've been discussing a little bit this week, but the Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, many others as well, have talked about, per sources, there are things coming into place that will shorten the college football game. The changes are, quote, meant to reduce plays in games for safety and game length reasons. I'm sure that's why they're doing it. But the four proposals, prohibiting consecutive timeouts, so for example, like icing kicks, no one-time downs at the end of the first quarter and the third quarter. The clock, this is where it gets interesting. Clock running after first downs, except inside of 2 minutes and a half, and clock running on incompletions once the ball is spotted, which is a really interesting one. Mark, your overall thoughts on that and what the powers that be are trying to do to college football?
Well, I got a bone to pick with you about Gamecock college football, Chris, but I'm going to wait on that for a minute. I will politely answer your question. Raise your hands, anyone who wants less college football. Is anybody doing that? Is anybody saying, you know what I would really appreciate? Like what we don't want in sports, Chris, is we don't want Braves games in game number 66 of the year going into the 16th inning. That's what we don't want, okay? And Rob Manfred, I'm one of the only guys who loves how progressive he is in trying to, trying to adapt the game to the modern times. Who the hell is saying, give me less college football, speed up the game? The time of games has been remarkably consistent. The time of games was 3 hours and 18 minutes in 2018. It was 3 hours and 20 minutes in 2020, 3 hours and 19 minutes in 2021, and 3 hours and 21 minutes in 2022. How could you possibly be more consistent than that? You want to ruin the game? Start running the clock after incomplete passes, man. And seriously, then Chris, have we thought ahead to this point? Does the clock run now when you spike the football late in the game? Sorry, incomplete pass. Clock is running. By the way, between me and you, why isn't spiking the football intentional grounding? Where is the receiver? Close by to that, Chris. You're not. The quarterback's in the pocket, right? Where is the receiver? You're throwing the football. How is that not intentional grounding? So, I think that is the most awful idea that I have ever heard in my life. Some of the other ones I don't mind, right? I don't mind the no icing the kicker. Studies have shown that doesn't even work. But literally nobody is saying, man, you know what? This sport that we are most passionate about, go ahead and speed it up. I've got to get on with my day. That is the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
Yeah, college football fans, I think, would watch 6-hour games if it came down to, because why not? We only get like 12 or 13 of them a year. Mark, what's the bone to pick here? What's up with
Yeah, and one more point on that, Chris. Most teams get 6 home games a year, right? Yeah. If you're in the stadium for 4 hours, this is something you and I talk about, fans talk about 365, 24/7. So if you get 6 home games a year, you're in your stadium for a total of 24 hours, okay? You get to be in your stadium for your sports passion one day out of 365 for the year. Yeah. Who the hell wants that time to speed up quicker? That makes absolutely, positively no sense. No sense whatsoever. Okay, Chris, here's the bone to pick. There are a ton of smart people out there, okay? You potentially being one of them, who are latching on to total nonsense because we get into this tiered fight among college football fan bases. Chris, please tell me you're not buying the nonsense that based on opponents' winning percentage, the Gamecocks have the toughest schedule in college football next year. What a bunch of hooey. Are you kidding me? I was seeing this on 24/7 Sports, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what? When
actually posted a graphic this morning.
Schedule strength based on last year's opponent's record? And has anybody even stopped to consider the fact, a major factor in the Gamecocks' opponent's winning percentage being great, right? So what they do is they look at the 2023 schedule and they say, what did these teams do last year? Oh, I don't know, Chris. Furman was 10-3. That means you got the most difficult schedule in America. And I love Furman. That's a different level of football, and you know it. Yeah. Jacksonville State at the FCS level went 9-2 last year. Whoa, look at this. So 2 of your opponents have 19-5. Toughest schedule in all of college football. Chris Phillips, shame on you. These people chiming in on this BS, shame on you. Okay? Shame on you. You have as much claim to the most difficult schedule in college football as I have to the President of the United States. Okay? That is a bunch of bleeping nonsense. And you know it's nonsense, Chris. So why are you hyping it up? You said something like, as sure as death and taxes, the Gamecocks. Based on what? Jacksonville State was 9-2. Furman was 10-3. There's your opponent's winning percentage, brother.
My response to it is this, Mark, don't shoot the messenger. I'm not the one that put the stats together. So,
but Chris, when did we start using that to determine next year's schedule strength?
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying too, because I mean, you go off the last year's record, and the team could be terrible in this coming year, but we're going off of last year's.
But
team,
you're getting credit for Furman's 10-3.
Right.
You're getting credit for Jacksonville State's 9-2.
Yeah,
and it's
I
mean,
like
it's absurd.
You know what I think?
Look, South Carolina's got a good schedule.
Yeah.
You play 2 of the better all cupcakes conference teams, right? Mm-hmm. In Clemson and North Carolina. You get credit for that, right? You absolutely get credit for that, right? Furman Jacksonville State, look, that's not going to move the strength of schedule for you. But if you play in the SEC and you schedule Clemson and Furman, I've got respect for your schedule. I do. But just don't hit me with this. Like, come on, man. Come on. Are people really buying what you're selling, man? Because I feel like I bought a ticket to a bogus movie, man, with that sales job. I really do.
Well, I'll say this, Mark, and again, I think a lot of it comes from it's February and we need something to talk about. And so it was Phil Steele, I think, that originally put these stats
But he
together.
never said toughest schedule. He said opponent's winning percentage, right?
Yeah,
And
which
then
people in turn
everyone's
are
coming
saying
out with these lists of toughest
right.
schedules, and I'm like, toughest schedule.
So let me
based on
ask you this,
Jacksonville
Mark.
State
How
and
would
Furman
you
going 19-5?
how would you determine the toughest schedule then, based off of like preseason ranking, or like what are you going? I mean, because it feels like it's kind of a it's a very debatable topic, right? I mean, there are multiple fan bases that could probably argue. I mean, I just always look at it as this: if you're the Gamecocks, you're in the SEC, and you got to play Clem Sucks every year, your schedule's tough. Mark, have forever said, and this could be a fun topic of conversation, because I know maybe Florida's caught some grief. Really, all SEC teams have caught some grief for scheduling. Alabama's always looked at as they play 4 cupcakes, and then the SEC. My thought on it is like the SEC's tough enough. Like,
Yep.
While I love the games against, like, North Carolina's a cool game, and I think 2025 the Gamecocks open up against Virginia Tech and Atlanta, like that will be really cool. But I don't need to beef up the schedule, Mark, especially as a South Carolina fan. When you already have to play the Tigers, it's like, I'm cool with 3 layups, right? Like getting to, maybe it sounds like a loser's mentality, but just padding the wins, I'm all for that. Like we have nothing to prove. You play in the toughest conference in America, and now you're adding Oklahoma and Texas. Like, there's no need to play these tough games.
Chris, I'm a Florida Gator grad. I have no need to go to Utah this year. Cameron rising, how about Cameron descending off of the schedule? Okay? I don't need any of that. Right. Why does Florida need to go to Utah next year? Oh, because they haven't played an out-of-conference game out of state in 20 years. Like, look, man, I'm totally with you on that. And you know as well as I do that the schedule stuff, it's largely subjective based on what people's preseason rankings are. This would be a really cool study, Chris. Maybe you and I can get together and make this happen. You know how you determine that? The only way to determine that objectively is when the season was over, right? So now you can go back and look at the 2022 season and determine who actually played the toughest schedule with final rankings, right? Final FPI rankings. I've got a guy, Kelly, on my show today, the Kelly Ford rankings. He's one of 6 or 7 guys that have the best computer models of team strengths, Chris. So he's coming on my show today. He'll be on at 3:20 p.m. But after the season, before the season, you have too much inaccuracy, right? Every single year, like this year, Florida State is the overrated team that I'm selling on that, was 5-3 in the ACC this year, but we're going to crown their ass, right? Like, we're going to just go ahead and crown them 5-3 in the ACC. They're unbelievable. Florida almost beat them. Oklahoma almost beat them. Those were 2 6-7 teams that just happened to not be in the ACC and controlled the line of scrimmage against Florida State. So we can do that, Chris, but the only way it can be objective and not subjective, fact-based and not opinion-based, is to do it when the season's over, which would actually be a pretty cool exercise if you ask me. Who actually had the top 5 schedules in college football last year? But just don't feed me, hey, man, Furman and Jacksonville State were really good last year, so South Carolina's got the toughest schedule in America. Come on, man.
Don't sleep on the Paladins, Mark. No, I hear you.
Will
sure.
Core, by the way, says this guy is dumb AF, and we play a tough-ass schedule. Will, nice to meet you. I'm happy to be making friends here on the Spurs Up show today. Always looking at – nobody's saying you don't play a tough schedule, brother. You do play a tough schedule. You play in the greatest conference in all the land. Just don't feed me the BS that you're playing the toughest schedule because Furman and Jacksonville State had a good record last year. Don't give me that. You might be top 10. You might be top 20. Okay? But Will Corbett's great to meet you. You play a tough schedule. You don't need to defend your schedule to anybody. Okay? Clemson playing in the ACC is hurting them more, Chris. And you remember, Chris, when I had that scoop August of 2021, Clemson and Florida State reached out to the SEC. and they tried their best to shoot it down, both Clemson and Florida State. You now know that was accurate, right? You now know that they want into the SEC. And the SEC would add Notre Dame yesterday. I think the SEC might be making a mistake here, Chris. What their take is like, look, we don't really need Florida State because we have North Central Florida, we have the market. We don't really need Clemson because we have the South Carolina market. Brother, if the Big 12 adding the Houston Cougars, I got news for you. I'm from Houston. I live there, Chris. Adding Houston doesn't give you the Houston market. Nobody living in Houston watches the Houston Cougars. Oh man, let's add Boston College. It gives us the Boston market. Nobody that's a pro sports town, dude. Nobody in Boston watches the Boston College Eagles. So, like, if you add Florida State, you have 75% of Florida. You want 100%, add Miami too. You know, if you have South Carolina, you have 50% of the states. If you want 100%, add Clemson, right? So I'll ask you this question, Chris, and I'll ask this to your audience and your listeners. Do you think long-term Clemson is SEC bound? That's question number one. And question number two, would you put up roadblocks to prevent Clemson from getting into the SEC? Do you want Clemson in the SEC, or would you prefer that be an advantage that the Gamecocks always hold over their hated rival?
Yeah, Mark, I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to bring it up because I saw you guys talked about it on your show in regards to the Tigers potentially moving to the SEC, and that you believe, you guys said you believe it will happen. You know, with expansion taking place, I think you'd be naive to say no, that it indefinitely will not happen. I can most certainly see it. I mean, why would they? I mean, I've always, as much as I hate Clem sucks, man, I've always kind of viewed them as an SEC team in the ACC anyways. Just with the way that the stadium, the level of football, whatever. So I'm someone, listen, Mark, I run towards the competition, not away from it. I'd have no problem with them being in. Would it surprise me if South Carolina put up some sort of roadblocks or objected to it? Yes, because of, I think, the advantages it gives you in recruiting and just what being in the SEC means, right? You feel like that's an advantage you have over your rival, but they play every year anyways. I mean, why not? It's not like you're all of a sudden picking up a new opponent. So I'd have no issue with it. I understand why some would and why you would balk at it. And, like, if I could make the decision up to me, do I bring them in? No, but it wouldn't necessarily bother me if they join the league, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the SEC, and like Greg Byrne was saying that, look, I think we're good right now with 16, and they're going to feel that way, Chris, until the Big Ten gets to 20, right? And then when the Big Ten gets to 20, they're not going to want to be left behind. Notre Dame is the hot neighbor, is the girl next door that everybody wants, right? Then I think, to me, Chris, Clemson and Florida State make the most sense. And then if you're getting to 20, the fourth spot for me would come down to Miami or Virginia Tech, right? So Notre Dame, Clemson, and Florida State, to me, if you can get Notre Dame, how about the hilarity behind how Notre Dame has used the ACC, right? Like when the pandemic season was here, okay, we can only play this year if we're in a conference. We'll join you. The ACC has been trying to get Notre Dame into a committed relationship forever, and Notre Dame is like using ACC as a friends with benefits. Isn't that hilarious? How they just totally use them. And you know as well as I do, if and when Notre Dame actually does enter a committed relationship, it's going to be with the Big Ten or the SEC. They're not joining the ACC. Who would sign up for that, right?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Mark, to your point, I want to ask you this. How do you think it would affect South Carolina? Do you think it would be a major negative if the Tigers were to find their way to the SEC? Do you think there'd be any sort of impact on the Gamecocks?
It makes Clemson better. It improves Clemson's finances, right? And it improves Clemson's recruiting base. It worsens Clemson's record. But yet again, Chris, what did we learn last year? That 7-4 in the SEC, the Gamecocks, are better than 10-1 in the ACC. So everybody now understands the curve. There's a 2 or 3 game curve where your record is going to be that much worse. With a 12-team playoff, you're going to have to be, if you're not a conference winner, you're going to have to be 10-2 to get in. In the SEC, that is a brutal ask, but that's where you got to be to get in. You can be 9-3 and get in. if you are a conference champion, but you know as well as I do that no 9-3 team from the SEC is going to win the conference, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see 2010 again, which is what the record the Gamecocks had in 2010 when they went to the SEC championship, 9-3. A really interesting year for the league. Mark, I'm going to save the specific South Carolina Clem Sucks questions on the diamond for next week when we have you on, because that's going to be a really, really fun week, a fun weekend. I get into it. That's like my Super Bowl of the baseball season, and I know you'll be there in Greenville for the game, which I know you're excited about. But I know it's been, if you're not a diehard college baseball fan, probably, I'm sure you've been keeping up from afar, but what South Carolina and the Tigers have both been doing. Your just overall thoughts. Again, it's lesser competition. UMass Lowell, Winthrop, Queens, Gamecocks, an intriguing series this weekend against the Penn Quakers of the Ivy League. But has anything stood out to you early in the college baseball season? I know you're looking for reasons sort of to be invested and watch, if you will, more so. Has there been anything that stood out to you at this point?
No, I'm just really impressed. Look, I'm really impressed with the way the team has started this year, Chris. The bats have really been going. But I do not want Gamecock fans to fall into the same, well, this is good enough. I don't want them to fall. You have a national championship program, a back-to-back national championship program, right? And so do not settle for anything less than what the program standard is, right? One of the things working against Clemson right now is like best is the standard. And Dabo's had to walk that back a little bit. He said, look, we're not going to walk around like a bunch of failures around here when we win the ACC. But Dabo, you said best is the standard, right? What does best mean, right? So you said that. And so if you are not meeting the standard, your fan base isn't going to feel like you are being successful. Chris, the reality is you need to hold Mark Kingston's feet to the fire. I'm not saying light him on fire. He's got every chance to have a great season this year, but you have laid out the expectations. The expectations have to be met, or it's time for the Gamecocks to look for a new head coach. And in some of these early season battles, you want the team to get out to a good start. They have gotten out to a good start. But as this moves along, you're going to find out what this team is truly made of. I thought this was interesting. The Gamecocks have been a preseason top 25 team, but a lot of the analytics have them in the mid 40s as a team. So who's right and who's wrong here? Are the voters right or are the analytics right? If the voters are right, Mark Kingston could have an extended future in Columbia. If the analytics are right about this team, this could be Mark Kingston's last year. But never lower your expectations, man. Like, we are in a society now, Chris, where everyone wants to be politically correct and nice and friendly and all this stuff. And look, Kermit Davis was fired from Ole Miss today because he wasn't good. He wasn't good at his job. Like, why is that so hard to say? He's not good. It's not good enough. Never lower your standards and never allow history and lack of success in your history to determine your expectations moving forward. There is nothing preventing Gamecock football, the Gamecock football program, from winning a national championship. Nothing. There's absolutely no reason that can't be achieved. Same with Gamecock basketball. And you don't need me to tell you, same with Gamecock baseball, because you've already achieved it, right? So you set the standard, nobody else. And as long as you don't have a financial hurdle or a recruiting hurdle, there is zero reason why you can't attain that.
Well, Mark, the good news with the Yardcocks is this. I don't think there's a whole lot of gray area, and the expectations and standards are high, especially from yours truly. And Mark, listen, man, I don't run away from calling for a coach's job. That's pretty evident at this point. So for sure, we will be holding folks accountable here on TSUS, I can assure you. And I know you will be as well on Offsides with Marc Ryan. Y'all definitely check it out. 3 to 7, Monday through Friday. Correct, Mark?
Absolutely. 3 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. We will see you guys today. Always spirited discussion. Always a ton of fun. Truly appreciate your audience. Do invite you to check us out. And if you would be so kind to follow us on Twitter, that would be great as well. At Marc Ryan on Air. That's at MARC Ryan on Air. Chris, thank you so much, man.
Mark, you're the man. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon, my friend.
Take care, buddy.